Today I'm going to look at the differences between shooting a time-lapse in S&Q mode on your A7 III and the traditional way with using an intervalometer. Since doing a few videos on time-lapses and hyperlapses, a few people have said, why not just use S&Q mode? So I'm going to find out what the differences are. With the older generation Sony cameras, you can download the app which allows you to build a time-lapse in camera. However, I've never really done that, and I've always used a third-party intervalometer. With the third generation of Sony cameras like the A7 III and the A7R III, there's a new mode called S&Q. This is basically short for slow and quick. It enables you to shoot slow motion, but it also enables you to shoot time lapses. For me, when I want to shoot a time lapse, I want to try and get the best quality possible. So using an intervalometer and getting full-size images seems the best way to do this. There are a few limitations, so I'm going to have a look at them and see the pros and cons in shooting a time lapse with an intervalometer and shooting it in S&Q mode. To shoot in S&Q mode, go to the menu 2 and scroll down to S&Q settings. Change the frame rate to 1 frame a second. Switch your top dial to S&Q. Once you've got your settings where you want them to be, press record and then wait for at least 5 minutes for a 12-second time-lapse sequence. When you do it this way, it'll have the time-lapse in your camera ready to go. It basically records it as a video, but it just sets the video frame rate to 1 frame a second. So it's not taking any photographs that you have to edit afterwards, it's compiling it as a video. You can just download it straight to your hard drive once you get home and bring it straight into your editing software. To shoot with an intervalometer, set your camera to manual mode and shoot with a manual focus lens wherever possible to keep the aperture exactly the same. Set your camera settings for the exposure you want. Focus where you want to in the image. Plug in the intervalometer. Set the intervalometer to the interval you want, as well as a delay so you can put the intervalometer down before it starts, and then wait for the allocated time or allocated number of shots to be taken. Then there is the post-processing. Import all the images to your hard drive, bring them into your editing software of choice, and edit them to the look that you want. Sync all images. Output all the images as a JPEG sequence. Bring into Premiere Pro, Photoshop or After Effects and compile into a sequence resizing to the frame that you want. Export as a video file, import into your editing software of choice and then edit it into your video. So you can see shooting a time-lapse with an intervalometer takes a lot of time and effort. It's quick and easy. As long as you get the settings right in camera, you can get a really good time-lapse. It's perfect for run and gun situations. There's no long drawn out post-processing. You use a lot less memory. You can shoot at half-second intervals, whereas with an intervalometer you can't. When shooting at 1 frame per second, you can't lower the shutter speed lower than 1/25th of a second unless you change the S&Q exposure mode to manual. Once in manual, you can shoot at half a second shutter speed. This means you'll be following the 180-degree rule. If you're not sure what the 180-degree rule is, click on the eye in the corner. This will take you to my time-lapse video. With a maximum exposure time of half a second, this limits your low light shooting options. Just make sure you have a fast lens so you don't have to bump up the ISO too much. I shot this hyperlapse at 30-second exposures, which is not possible with S&Q mode. Also, the bitrate is at 50 megabits per second, so you won't be able to push the image around too much. I shot these 2 time-lapses off a bridge in the marina into the sun. S&Q mode struggles with the high dynamic range of the shot, whereas the raw images taken with an intervalometer can cope with it well. You have the ability to shoot in RAW, so you'll have so much data to play with. This is both a pro and a con. You'll be able to crop in as it will be the equivalent of a 6K image from a Sony A7 III, or almost an 8K image with the A7R III, but you will be maxing out your memory cards after a number of sequences, and also you'll use up a lot of hard drive space in processing. You can shoot a lot longer intervals than just 1 second, giving you the ability to shoot things like ice melting, shadows moving, and astro time lapses. With S&Q mode, it's limited to 1 frame per second, but you can shoot at 2 frames a second and faster. The workflow is really long and drawn out. I've mentioned it already, but if you shoot a lot of time-lapse sequences, you'll end up using so much hard drive space. With S&Q mode, the time-lapse is ready and you can actually preview it in camera. When shooting with an intervalometer, you can quickly flick through the photographs, but you won't have a preview of what it'll actually look like. You need to have fast memory cards. They do print a number on there, but this is the read speed, not the write speed. Now I have these two cards. The Lexar one failed on a couple of time lapses I was shooting. The buffer filled up and the time lapse stopped working properly. With the Transcend card, this worked perfectly. So I think the Transcend one has a faster write speed. So after doing this test, I've realized that S&Q does have its uses. It's really good for a run and gun time lapse where you have a limited amount of time to shoot it and a limited amount of time to edit. Also, if I want to reduce the interval to half a second, it's perfect for this. With an intervalometer, I can't really do that. As long as there's enough light about, S&Q does produce a good time lapse. After testing these two different ways of shooting time lapses out, I'm definitely going to use S&Q mode in certain circumstances. When the dynamic range of the shot isn't too high, or if you have cars and people moving through the frame, it's really good for this. What's especially good with cars and people is being able to set it to 2 frames a second. This seems to give a much more realistic kind of movement. Now, if you shoot with a camera other than a Sony, you'll probably have an intervalometer already built into your camera. Now this is great because it means you don't have to carry any extra bits of kit around with you. Now one thing I'm really looking forward to is the A7iii firmware 3.0 update. We've been told that this is going to have an intervalometer built in, so it'll be great to see how this functions. Then once this option is available, we'll have the opportunity to shoot in S&Q mode or shoot a proper time lapse in camera. And that's about it. I've been shooting time lapses for years, from doing hyperlapses, using time-lapse sequences, to doing day to night time lapses. There's a lot to them and they're really interesting and great fun, especially when you get a really good looking sequence at the end of it. I wasn't thinking that S&Q mode would be any good, but after doing this video, I've found that it does have its uses. You just have to apply all the principles that you would when shooting a video over shooting raw photographs. As always, if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And for weekly tutorials, hints and tips in photography and videography, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you next time.